With a cuckoo popping box in the middle of my throat, they tried to germinate one, dripping honey and sugar down my tongue, in regular doses, in the days and the nights. This one is for the sweetening and the softening, they would tell me. For each time I would open my mouth, they mistook my pulmonary aggression as my aggression. My expression, a command for attention. My woeful wails signaled battle cries which rebounded against the roof of their thatched skies. Now these particular lines come from a certain observation that I have had, that there is a particular cognitive dissonance that comes about with being brought up as a girl child, expected to live up to scripted norms of excellence. This comes from the awareness of a demarcated territory, outside which the exhibition of your selfhood is labeled as a transgression and not a talent. For most parts of our collective childhoods as young girls, I remember walking to and back from school. The exploration of all that was beyond that immediate neighborhood was a fantasy of the someday. Until then, the stage space, where I would become a frequent presence, became my temporary altar of visibility and brilliance, where I sought the heady thrill of self-expression in multiple forms, but most importantly, through speech and dance. But besides being an early performer, I was also a voracious reader. Now imagine the thrill of a 13-year-old girl then on discovering the marvels of an imagined utopian space, where women roamed free without fear, pursued education and their daily jobs, devised eco-friendly means and ways of creating electricity, and much more. Whereas men remained indoors, segregated as they were because of their primitive and baser instincts. You get the drift? Unlike the effortless sophistication of women in the city. Now, of course, this highly satirical utopian story stayed with me. But it would not be until much later that I would realize that this short story, Sultana's Dream by Begum Rokeya, a feminist trailblazing educator and writer, went back to almost 50 years before independence. That Ladyland has continued to remain just a fantastical realm without a concrete shape, a seaside citadel of sorts for the women of this country who still need to think twice before being alone in public spaces despite all possible illusions of agency, haunted me. But what haunted me further was this fact, that with the passage of time, the spectre of Ladyland has only grown stronger in the socio-cultural milieu of the country and for those outside, in multiple forms, in the form of letters, short stories, picture books, illustrations, and much more. With an afterlife which was much stronger than during its time of publication, I was intrigued by its intergenerational awareness for women, which, if anything, was a harsh awakening of how little we had progressed when it came to providing safe spaces for women in the country. I understood that for the deprived, hope was never a concrete monument, but a spectral presence, a temporal getaway from the many restrictions of patriarchal permanence. And Ladyland, in the many mutating forms of its significance, has lived on in the cultural memory of this country's women who do not have the luxury to give up on it, erecting it time and again against the crashing rocks of our reality, which has always been tinged with the color of violence. And it is the radical potential of these seaside citadels in literature that I am researching on for my PhD at IIT Guwahati. Now, in the absolute lack of feminist inputs in urban planning and the construction of safe spaces for women, by going beyond the expected routes, I am thus more focused not on adding to the statistics of what is and what shall continue to be, but through the defamiliarizing effect of fiction, I intend to assess what can be. Through fiction, I want to look at its most rawest form, what the dream experience of navigating spaces for women can be. That is, what role does language play in world building, a feminist world building in our society? Or in more poetic terms, you could say, how long does it take for the skin of water to leave an impression of itself on the very rock of perpetuity? Now, this is a question most creatives in some form or the other are constantly getting involved with. But one of the foremost experiences which revealed my own obsession with the transformative nature of spaces revealed itself quite early during a school solo dance recital, when during the very performance, a nail lodged itself into the soft of my foot's flesh. And caught as I was in a state of ecstatic exuberance, I did not want to give up on that space. So I decided to swallow my cry within, keep the smile intact on my face, and carry on with the performance. By then, I was aware of the legendary determination and grit of the famous Bharatanatyam dancer, Sudha Chandran, who, after having lost one of her feet in a horrific accident at the age of 17, had to get for herself a prosthetic Jaipur foot to not give up on her dancing. That a life-altering disability did not come in the way of her dancing had taken such a strong root in my mind that in that moment, I was indeed channeling the grit, the resolve, the courage of somebody whose desire to perform, whose desire to create was so high that nothing could come against it. When I won the competition later that day, I had this woman I had never met before in my life to thank for. But one question remained. Why is it that despite having heard several such stories of adversity, this particular one had stayed with me? Years later, when rhythm came to take an ever more internal seat in me through poetry and speech, and I would immerse myself in trying to create such spaces of self-expression, I would be taken in by the world of feminist literature. And that is where I found my answers. I realized the reason why I related to Sudha Chandran was because of the subconscious generational awareness of us women always having had to struggle to create a space of our own. That this stage that I currently stand upon was once upon a time a space associated with scandal, as public visibility in itself was frowned upon for women, is embedded in our very psyche. That is what stayed with me. So when modern women of our time claim these spaces for themselves, a certain generational healing is taking place. They know that they have crossed a certain threshold, a certain boundary, and when they know of that fact, they hold on to it with all the more resolve, all the more grit, and all the more courage. Now, these observations became all the more stronger for me during the pandemic, when the entire world had shut down, and the world was reeling under the weight of contagion. And I came to know of the resilient experimental tactics adopted by several women theatre practitioners in Assam, my homeland, where I got to know that despite having a lot of issues with respect to funding, with respect to getting emotional or physical or financial support, these women had still held on to their craft with utmost dedication. They were in fact actually experimenting with the very notion of space in the absence of the conventional stage space. When I asked myself again, why is it that these women had held on to their craft with such resilience and such determination, despite when they could actually make a lot of excuses during that time, the answer came to me back again. That is, these women have understood that women's creativity has never been a luxury, and you need to hold on to it all the more so during times of crisis. So I actually consider these instances to be a continued legacy of Sultana's dream, where these women and women across the country have committed themselves to the task of creating these temporary ephemeral ladylands in the hope that someday it will be here to stay. They have done so in the absence of a designated space for women's creativity and, safe spaces for women's mobility. These are resistant acts of countercultural creativity in the ordained script of our reality. These are resistant fictions, I would like to call them. Why fiction? Because when you think of it, they are actually carving newer narratives against a certain preordained description of their own reality, or what has been provided for them. So what I would like to say is these resistant fictions are important archives for feminist world building. You cannot believe that there is a particular floor plan, a color scheme, any infrastructural or technological facility without being able to embody it, where you can call that, this is a feminist space. You cannot say so. It is only in the embodied, experience, sensual aspect of it that one feels belonged, one feels heard, and one feels seen. So what have these women done? These women have transformed the very quality of impermanence into a resilient tactic, especially in an age of capitalism, which has, taken away the very revolutionary essence of feminism. And these resistant fictions are all the more essential in an age where we think that probably technologization is the easy answer, the easy solution to all kinds of development. But mapping, plotting, locating geographies of fear for women is not it all. As newer forms of subjugation, newer forms of surveillance and patriarchy become apparent. Now, a lot of research has been conducted on victims of gender and sexual violence, and especially research conducted by Carol Ballantyne and Pauletta, who say that, there are predictable scripts that victims of sexual violence often end up prescribing to. There is a predictable storyline to it. But what about matters of intersectionality then? Can two people ever experience trauma in the same way? Of course not. But what if I were to tell you that research conducted by Emory University says that reading fiction actually opens up newer pathways in your brain which mimics and looks a lot like how it would feel like if you really lived the life in the book that you just read. Now, while this research has mainly been cited so as to talk about, how to become a more intelligent person or a more empathetic person, I am more focused on the gendered consequences of this research. What does it mean for a gendered subaltern to get newer pathways open up in their minds? It creates possibility. It creates the presence of newer alternate possibilities for these people who can embody and enact newer alternative scripts for agency. You cannot believe that people belonging to different races, from different castes, color, background, religion, region, can have and experience trauma in the same way. So what do these fictions do? These fictions ensure that people from all across the world have different experiences, and they celebrate these differences and also own up to their narratives in all of their individuality. That is what these fictions do. And when these fictions, therefore, as was the case with Sultana's Dream, continue to be replicated, continue to be mutated, circulated, and they take newer registers, they end up becoming a counter-technology of sorts. You would ask me, what kind of a counter-technology? A counter-technology which necessarily complicates concerns which are easily being simplified in today's terms. It necessarily complicates concerns and nuances which are often easily glossed out and reduced in today's simplified, and technologized world. These fictions give people their embodied narratives. And for as long as we shall continue to hold on to these beliefs, and we shall continue to strive for our dreams, I believe that we will continue to erect these temporal ladylands in the hope that someday it will be here to persist and it will be here to stay. Now, I would like to end with a short poem that I had written titled Graffiti Ghazal, from a moment of inspiration, having got to know about all of these experiences of women carving their own counter-geographies. And it was commissioned by writingwomen.co, and it goes like this. To piss and pillage is not for us to mark territory in your city. We roll out the credits after spray painting our shame in this city. Ghazab girls, stirring desire like it is loose change in our Gulistan. You cannot urban clap our presence out of this sticky city. Sensual architects plotting the coordinates of 1,000 dreams. The cartography of joy is etched in the silk of water in this city. Wall-sized statements of multi-dimensional otherness. Our beauty is a strange disease. Only dirt clings like kindness in this holy city. Nature's first love and enemy is routine. So we dip our brushes in the lip of thrill in this censored city. To befriend faith is to know of the best hiding places in these alleys. Its underbelly keeps score with every footfall in this paper city. The joke is that honor rhymes with horror. So we blink twice, silently. Only so you notice, tonight we shall dance with bruises in our fabled city. Thank you.